Toby was the best at pretending. Riding our steeds with their handlebar streamers out into the woods, he would do the old cowpoke voice. Tucking his thumb into a gun belt that wasn't there, he sighted down an imaginary barrel when we would duel at high lunch. If I won, he would drop down right to the floor, spread eagle, and hold his breath for the longest time. Then we would laugh and laugh and laugh, and he'd call me a yellowbelly, and would canter in our sneakers off through the woods. As astronauts, Toby seemed to float right off his toes with each moonstride, while I stumbled along behind, and his ray gun sounds would send shiver down the aliens' spines, if they had one. Playing spies, sometimes I wouldn't see Toby for days, not even at school. I'd sit alone at lunch, watching over my shoulder for the other agent, but Toby was too good at pretending, and, taking a sip from my paper cup, I would realize that the lemonade had been changed for fizzy water. I'd cough and sputter on the poison, my head hitting the table, and Toby would finally turn up from his hiding place and laugh as I tried to stay still just like he could. But Toby's best pretend was in the summer holidays. We spent most of our hazy days in the woods, leaping over ale barrel logs, ducking beneath rigging of low-hanging branches. Slick and stinking with sweat, we hid around cargo crate tree stumps and fought with saber sticks all the way up to the crow's nest, a cliff overlooking our little hometown, its toes lapped by a swift river below. I was the heroic young sailor, avenging my father who was made to walk the plank by Toby's dreaded Captain Bilgewater. He swaggered and cussed and sang Molly Malone. We fought with finesse, sabers flashing with attacks and feints. I fell and he raised his blade above his head, ready to finish the hero with an evil grin across his face. Toby was great at pretending, so when I kicked his leg from under him, he screamed and fell, just like in the comics, in the movies, in our favorite bedtime stories. The pirate captain was vanquished, falling from the crow's nest to the shark-infested sea below. I looked over the cliff edge, down at the distant river, and saw the splash of the rock Toby must have dropped. It was a great effect. I laughed and began to look for him, but Toby was the best at pretending. He wasn't likely to let me find him. I rode home that night, the hero returning victorious, and waited for Toby to start our next game. So devious was his plan that Toby didn't go home that night. He didn't come to play the next day. He hid. And the longer he stayed away, the more convinced I was that the dreaded Captain Bilgewater would come back to take revenge at any moment. Toby's mum came to visit us. I told her about the game, of course, and that Toby would be back. I told her how good he was at pretending. But she cried and hung on to me until my mum pulled me away. And still, Toby played the game. At his funeral, I wasn't stupid enough to look at the coffin. Toby wasn't there. He'd be behind one of the graveyard's trees, giggling at his genius and plotting his return with a flourish. But he was so good at pretending, so smart that I couldn't spot him. Toby took it too far. He didn't come to school the first day of the new year, and missed the assembly about him where the teachers cried and students cried, and I didn't. People looked at me funny, but I couldn't cry because I knew the truth. Toby would reveal himself any day now, and it all looked stupid. He wasn't fooling me. And he did come back, just like I knew he would. When the first stone hit my bedroom window, I barely heard it through the covers pulled up over my ears, but it was enough to make me look up for when the second one hit. A soft tap on the glass, and then a third. I crept over to the window, rubbing sand from my eyes, and peered down at the midnight garden. Toby stood there, looking up, his face a little mirror of the moon. Toby was the best at pretending. His clothes were sodden and torn, his hair slick as if he'd just come through a rainstorm. He waved to me, astronaut slow. When he smiled, it was his villain smile. And when he walked into the bushes at the edge of the garden, it was so slowly, so softly, that I knew he was playing a new character, a new game, one that I didn't know. I told my mom the next day that I had seen him, and she knelt in front of me, looking right down deep into my eyes before hugging me. People never believed how good a pretender Toby was, but I was his best friend. I knew. I'd seen him be a cowboy, an astronaut, a pirate, and more. Toby didn't bother with rocks that night. I woke to the sound of whispers beyond the window, and saw Toby sat there on the sill beyond the glass, his face a little mirror of the moon.
Alive, alive, oh, alive, oh.
Toby was pretending, I knew, but still, a shiver ran through me. I don't like this game, I told him. Can we be pirates again?
Only one way to change the game,
he said in a perfect gurgling whisper made distant by the window.
Come to the cliff, play one last time.
I woke in the morning with my head on the sill, sun on my face and a crick in my neck. Mum watched me eat my breakfast, pack my bag, head to school, stern worry on her face at the son who hadn't slept. I didn't go to school. Ignoring the bus and the bell that rang out over the houses to call in the other kids, I veered off towards the woods. I went up by the bike track where our horses chased runaway trains, through the alien undergrowth of another world, between the swaying leaf-top masts and up the grassy plank to Captain Bilgewater's deck. I scrambled up the gravelly rigging and stood in the crow's nest, looked down on the river, and thought of the places I might sail to beyond the 7 suburbs below. But all those games were done with now. And I still didn't know what this new one was. I didn't know where I should be imagining, what character I had to play. So I sat on the cliff, listening to the river and the sounds of the forest, and waited for Toby to come and play. On the breeze came the bells of the school day, one after another until the day was done. The sun sank into the rooftops, and the darkness that hid in the forest crept its fingers up the hill to the cliff.
Alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive.
I leapt high enough to scrape the sky. Shiver me timbers, Captain, you gave me a fright. I laughed, and it came out in a shudder.
No cap, no cowboy, no heroes, no villains,
he said, stepping up beside me as night took hold of the town below.
No pretending this time. It's just you and me.
Is that what you meant? You're tired of our games? I said. I felt the weight of loss tug down on my heart, and something else. A release. Perhaps relief.
Come up here with me,
Toby gurgled. This game was different than any before. No chasing, no leaping, no fighting, no fun. Still, I stood up beside him, realizing that Toby was just a little shorter than me now. He hadn't grown an inch while hiding this summer. We looked out as the stars turned on, both above and below.
It's just like flying,
he said.
See, the skies are the same. You can fly all the way to the bottom. Put your arms out. Feel the wind.
I did.
Let it carry you over.
I leaned right forward, with the night breeze at my back, and felt the tug of the darkness on my sleeves. A frosty hand at the small of my back, where the sweat pooled, pushed me up onto my toes. The river loomed below, marked out by the moonlight, and its roar seemed to come up to greet me. My stomach dropped. The twinkling town below did a barrel roll in my vision. I stepped back. I don't want to play. This isn't fun.
Games let you pretend being brave,
Toby whispered from over my shoulder.
Now's the time to show me what you've learned. Step forward.
In a shuddery voice, I showed him what he wanted to see, what I'd learned. I knew when to stand up to the villain. No! Toby hissed in my ear, and the wind blew a gale. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I fell to the ground, Toby's fat, soggy fingers ice cold around my ankle. Toby stepped out over the cliff's moonlit edge as if the hungry void wasn't there at all, dragging me along behind. My shirt rode up, gravel scraping my skin raw as I slid. But I kicked and I screamed, fought harder than ever before. "I don't want to play! Leave me alone!" All at once, Toby's wet fingers slipped, taking my sneaker with them. He disappeared over the cliff's edge for the second time. Vanished. And I laid alone on the cliff, stars twinkling above and below. Walking home in the dark, in one sock and one shoe, one hand pressed to the stinging grazes on my side, I was greeted by angry worry at the door. I knew the games were over as I laid in bed that night. Everything was wrong. The hero, though victorious, felt cold and lost. The villain, although banished, had no final word, leaving only a lingering shiver. And that place on the cliff, overlooking our little hometown, was hard to imagine as anywhere else again. If you enjoyed this story, please rebel against the tyranny of the like button by sneering at it as you click. And if you'd like to see the darkness rise in the shadows of my room, go ahead and click subscribe. I dare you. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.